You know, I get a kick out of the New York Times. I don't think the reporters in the New York Times read their own newspaper. I don't, either that or they have just a complete lack of self-awareness that is most of the times comical. I'm thinking of this story they just printed the other day about Starbucks, where they said, well, Starbucks is going to close 8,000 stores and, you know, do 170,000 employees, and they're going to take the day off, and they're all going to get training in implicit bias and how to avoid it so they can avoid kicking black people out of the stores in case any of them go in there looking for free stuff again. And so the article's all about how, well, how do we know if this training works? How do we know if, you know, this, what we do? Well, we know all white people are just racist people constantly inflicting their racism on, relentless racism on black people for no reason whatsoever. But is there a cure for it? The study of white racism is, of course, that's the bread and butter of every African American studies department and every university in the country. My favorite racism test, it's called symbolic racism. Look it up on Google or whatever. You know, we did a big chapter on it in Don't Make the Black Kids Angry. Because here's what happens. When you want to do a study on, say, how do people who believe in the Second Amendment, how do their, you know, are they racist people? Is there a connection between racism and the Second Amendment? And here's what they do. They give you a test to see if you are a racist. And they don't just come up to you and say, hey, Johnny, do you think we should put all black people back in chains and send them back to Africa or some other ridiculous thing that nobody believes? No, what they do is they ask you 6 questions. And the questions are all along these lines. 1, do you believe in affirmative action? And then they ask something like, if black people worked harder, do you believe they could get ahead? Do you believe the condition of black people are responsible for their own behavior? And if you answer all those things the way a conservative does, which is no, you know, you don't like race, you don't like affirmative action. 2, you don't like preferential treatment. 3, yes, everybody can write their own ticket and stuff like that. If you believe those things, you are tagged as a racist. And so the New York Times, everybody else, doesn't have any trouble believing that there's a whole gajillions of white racists out there just ready to inflict their racism on black people for no reason whatsoever. But here's what's interesting to me. There's lots and lots of different kinds of racism tests, but they never give the racism test to black people. It's just white people who get them. So black people get a total pass. And you know they get a total pass because of articles like this. Now, here's an article about Bernie Sanders going to Jackson, Mississippi. Does anybody remember Jackson, Mississippi? Our favorite city councilman in America is in Jackson, Mississippi. Let's remind you who that is.
Ward 3 Jackson City Councilman Kenneth Stokes feels police from other cities are reckless when they chase misdemeanor suspects into Jackson. He wants to throw rocks, bricks, and bottles at these officers. The councilman met with reporters today and said such action will send a stern message to officers who want to track down young men who steal bubble gum.
Well, I suggest we get the black leadership together, and as these jurisdictions come into Jackson, we throw rocks and bricks and bottles at them. That'll send the message, we don't want you in here.
And so Jackson, Mississippi is a place where 5-6 years ago, a guy ran for mayor. He was the national leader for a time of a movement to for black people to have their own separate country, mostly in the South, a black separation thing. He ran for mayor of Jackson. Now his son's the mayor after he died in office. He ran for mayor of Jackson, and it's like 80. It's a chocolate city, 70-80% chocolate city, largest city in Mississippi, capital of Mississippi. But they're totally down with the cause in Jackson. Anyway, so Bernie Sanders, he didn't do very well with the fellas and their lovely ladies in the last election. So he said, well, I have to go down there and make amends, let them know I'm down with the cause, so the cause will be down with me. So Bernie goes to Jackson, and the first thing he goes down there and says is, well, Obama, you know, he was a brilliant guy, but he wasn't that good of a leader. He didn't really accomplish that much. Oh, that Black Twitter unleashed on Bernie. They all said that Bernie didn't know how to talk to black people, because there's a certain way of talking to black people that Bernie Sanders was not aware of. Apparently Hillary was, bringing the hot sauce out of the bottle, and he goes, my feet ain't no way tired. Remember Hillary doing all that crazy stuff? And so when this happens, no one looks at them and says, hey, that sounds like there's a little bias there. That sounds like there's a little racial hostility there, parentheses. No, it actually sounds like there's an enormous amount of racial hostility, because the people in this article have made their black race the central organizing feature of their life, and no one ever thinks to call them on it. So the article is just one long contemplation of this, how Bernie Sanders has to do something to be black so he can get some votes next time out, whatever he's doing. But my favorite part of the article came down kind of towards the end, where they're trying to explain the whole black thing to us, because it's a black thing and we wouldn't understand it. So they're going to explain the black thing to us down in Jackson. And they get a guy named Mike Espy. I think he was a congressman. He's running for senator in Mississippi. He goes, black people are very proud, or take a lot of pride in voting for black people. That doesn't sound ridiculously sociopathologically sick for somebody to say that and pretend it's anything other than what it is, which is racial venom, racial hostility dripping out of every pore of his body and the pore of every person involved in this article and every person involved with the whole Bernie Sanders Black Mississippi tour. And yet the New York Times wants us to contemplate just how awful white people are by asking us political questions about whether we in America believe that anybody can get ahead if they work, save, invest, and go to college, if they don't have kids out of wedlock, if they get a job, any job, if they don't use drugs, if they stay out of jail, if they get married. You do those 5 things, you'll be out, you won't go to jail. You'll actually, in spite of yourself, you will rise up. And the New York Times, the people at the Times, they're just totally oblivious to this whole thing they're reporting, they're a part of, they're approving, while casting an eye on us, saying people who would think that's a stupid thing, we're the bad ones and they're the good ones. Good Lord, how did we get so far off the rails in this country? And for all of you guys out there that say, oh God, that's the New York Times, they don't count because nobody reads them anymore, don't fool yourself. New York Times sets the tone and content for every newsroom in America, print, radio, and TV. So when these clowns come out and just drop this racial hostility and venom into their article as if it's like not anything we should pay attention to, we should definitely pay attention to that. Otherwise, we're going to make a lot of black kids angry.